Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar for evaluation requirements for schools designated as low performing. We will today have your microphones muted, but know that at any point when you have a question, you can type that in. We will be monitoring those questions, and if it's appropriate at the time, we will answer them during the presentation. If it's not appropriate at that exact moment, we'll wait till the end and we'll answer all questions then. So please feel free to ask your questions at any time, and we will make sure that you do receive an answer to all the questions. Additionally, any questions that are asked today or that were asked on Friday's webinar will be compiled into an FAQ document that you will have access to. So we will make sure that we make that available to you. So today we are going to do several things in this webinar. We have several objectives. We will review the North Carolina State Board of Education policy around the teacher performance appraisal process. We will talk about the process for conducting super observations for your teachers and for all of the licensed employees in your buildings. We will also review the mandatory improvement plan process, and I do want to say that some of you were involved in this process last year. However, it's going to be very different this year, so it's important that you pay attention to the process that we outlined today, because it will be very different than the process that we implemented when we started this last January. We are at a much different time in the school year, so there will be things that we have to do that we did not do last year. For instance, people who are on mandatory improvement plans, we will have to do a reassessment of progress, because we will be in observation cycle 2 or 3 during that reassessment, whereas last year we were already ready for summative, so the reassessment was the summative. So I do want to point that out. We will also have a variety of resources, including fillable evaluation forms that you will use for some of your licensed support staff. This presentation and the FAQ document will all be included in a Google form. We will give you that address for the Google form. It was on the first slide, but we will send that out with a recorded version of this webinar as well that you can reference later or share with your administrative teams. So just a quick review. I know when I met with many of you in August at the leadership team meeting, we did review the policy that establishes the teacher performance appraisal process. And with the designation as a low-performing school, there is a requirement that all licensed employees in designated low-performing schools must be evaluated on an expedited calendar. And by evaluated, it means rated on each standard. So our normal observations do not include an evaluation rating, but these particular observations have to be evaluations. That means each of the standards do require you to rate the overall performance of the employee on each of the standards. The statute does say that these need to be done early enough in the school year to provide adequate time for mandatory improvement plans, and they don't give us an exact timeline, but they say as early in the school year as possible. So right now we should be at the beginning of our observation cycle. So we should be doing these super observations during the first round of observations, and then the reassessments would fall during the second or the third round of observations. Please remember that we also have the state board statute that does state that all first and second year teachers, regardless of the type of school designation, be evaluated within the first semester of school. So it's going to be very important that we are doing these super observations as early as possible, because all of your first and second year initially licensed teacher will have to have a second observation before the end of first semester. So our state board policy does indicate all of the positions for which we do have to do one of these super observations. And we're going to refer to the low performing evaluations as super observations because they're much like an observation with the exception that you will provide a rating for every standard. So principals and assistant principals will have an evaluation. All teachers, all instructional support staff, which are certified employees such as media specialists, technology specialists, counselors, dean, facilitators, etc. We do know that some of your teachers, some of your AIG teachers or psychologists or possibly ESL teachers, PE, art teachers may be shared between other schools. For this particular policy, if the employee, the part-time employee or the shared employee is designated at the low-performing school as their home school, they will need a super observation. If you share a PE teacher with a school that is not a low-performing school and the other school is the teacher's home school, there will be no super observation for that employee. And if you have questions about that, you can contact your team leader. They can let you know which school is the home school. The home school is generally the school that is associated with payroll for that employee. So for all of the licensed staff, you are required to complete a super observation or an evaluation, and this needs to be done as early in the school year as possible. We will be talking about timelines in a minute. But within that super observation, you do need to make sure that you are reviewing and considering all of the information you have available on that employee. All information does include the prior year's summary evaluation and ratings, any available student growth including EVOS or ASW growth or MAP data, any kind of student growth data you have, their current professional development plan and goals, and even last year's professional development plan goals and their progress on those. So when you conduct the super observation, this will be most likely the first observation of the school year. This will be a formal observation that must be a minimum of 45 minutes. You will conduct a pre-conference where you will review with the employee all of the information you have on that employee about their performance and growth data and professional development plan goals at that time. You'll conduct the evaluation. You will write that evaluation up where you rate each standard, and you will have a post-conference. In order to rate each of the standards, you will not necessarily have a checkbox on the document. So what you will do in the comment section for each standard, you will write in the comment section for this super observation, the teacher, the counselor, the assistant principal, whichever employee group you are evaluating, is performing at an overall developing proficient, accomplished, or distinguished level in standard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you will start your comments with this sentence. Then you will continue to write your comments where you are discussing what took place during the observation, your impact statements regarding what the employee did, any areas for improvement or recommendations. You will still have all of that in your comments section. The only difference is you will have the statement of what the rating is for that standard and the fact that this is a super observation. The super observation will count as one of the required observations for whichever type of evaluation plan you are on for that particular employee. So most likely the super observation will be observation number 1 for each of them. So we're going to start by just talking about our teachers and licensed support staff, and specifically the licensed support staff on the NESIS plans. So this would not include your facilitators or deans. Looking at our teachers and licensed support staff who are on the NESIS plan, who are either on the comprehensive or the standard evaluation cycles, meaning they have to have 3 formal evaluations during the year or one formal and 2 abbreviated, either of those plans, you will start with a super observation as the first observation in the first container. So that will be a full formal observation, a minimum of 45 minutes in length, where you will have a pre-conference and you will rate each of the standards in the comments box on that particular evaluation. We are setting a recommended due date of October 28th. This is the due date for first round observations for comprehensive and standard evaluation cycle employees anyway. That is not a change in that due date. So we would like for you to get the first super observation done for this group on October 28th. Our teachers who are on the abbreviated evaluation cycle, these would be our teachers who have more than 3 years of experience and only have the 2 evaluations with standards 1 and 4. They will have to have a super observation. So their very first observation in the first observation container, you will need to use that in addition to a paper fillable form. So you'll open the abbreviated plan, you'll open container number 1, and you will go ahead and type standards 1 and 4 on that form, indicating, just like on the other people, this is a super observation and performance at this time on standard 1 is at an overall whatever level. But you will additionally go to either our Google folder or to a link we will have on the talent management page, and you will download a paper copy of the teacher evaluation instrument. This will allow you to rate each of the elements in the overall standard for all 5 of the standards of the teacher evaluation instrument. So you will need to complete that form. Standards 1 and 4 on the fillable form should look just like what you write on standard 1 and 4 in the My Talent container. You will meet with them for their post-conference. You will go over both the information that you have in My Talent and on the fillable form. You will have the employee sign the fillable form. You will upload that fillable form into that evaluation. You will upload it as an attachment. You will upload that fillable form into the attachment section in the mid-year PDP review bucket. So for the abbreviated super observation, you will write in the comment boxes in My Talent in the container number 1 that it's a super observation for 1 and 4. You will take the paper copy that you will download and fill out, have the employee sign it, and then that will get uploaded into the mid-year PDP review section. That will be due by November 18th. That was the regular due date for the first observation for our abbreviated plan employees. If the employee on the abbreviated plan is proficient in all 5 standards, they will remain on the abbreviated plan for the remainder of the year. They will need just 1 more of the abbreviated observations. However, if after completing that super observation, the abbreviated plan employee is below proficient in any of the standards, they will need to shift to the standard evaluation cycle, and you will need to complete a mandatory improvement plan. So, for all of the people we've talked about, and this is going to be true for all of your licensed staff, if they receive ratings that are all proficient or above, they will remain on their normal evaluation cycle for the rest of the year, and you will just keep evaluating them or providing them with performance feedback as normal. However, if an employee is rated below proficient in any standard, you will need to create a mandatory improvement plan. So I know last year we were pretty far along in the school year when this occurred. We were after the mid-year review in most cases. It was the end of January, and so we already knew if someone was kind of on track for for non-renewal, on track for renewal. So we didn't have to do a mandatory improvement plan with everybody. The statute does require for us to do so, and we're early in the school year. So on this first super observation, if the certified employee receives any rating below proficient on any of the standards, you will be developing a mandatory improvement plan. This mandatory improvement plan will be embedded in the PDP. So you will go back into the professional development plan to add additional goals. If you have not already started the initial PDP of the school year and you do the super observation first, you will just make these goals part of the PDP in addition to any other goals that are needed. If you have already completed a PDP and already signed off on the initial PDP for the school year, but realize that the employee does need a mandatory improvement plan, you will contact your team leader and they can reopen the initial PDP so that you can go in and add to it. You and the employee can review it and it can be signed off on. So all of these goals for the mandatory improvement plan will become part of the initial PDP document. So for any standard in which the employee is below proficient, you and the employee will create very specific goals to address that area of deficiency. So if they are below proficient in standards 2, 3, and 4, you will need goals around standards 2, 3, and 4. You will need to, with those goals, include recommendations and specific activities and support that will help the employee to improve to a proficient level. So these goals kind of serve as like an action plan of what we're expecting them to do, the supports you are going to provide at the school level, the strategies and activities that they need to implement so that they can hopefully improve to a proficient level. These mandatory improvement plan goals are going to be shorter in length than the overall professional development plan. That's why it's fine if you have other goals in the professional development plan. They will continue. But our mandatory improvement plan does need to be less than 90 days in length. It needs to be long enough that there's sufficient time to implement the strategies, but there needs to be enough time so that then at the end of the plan, you can go back and reassess the employee's performance to determine if they've reached a proficient level in each of the standards where you have a mandatory improvement plan goal. I would try to align the end date or the length of the mandatory improvement plan with when you are going to conduct the second or the third formal observation so that you are able to review progress at that time. Please keep in mind that all first and second year teachers will have to have their second formal observation completed by the end of first semester, which is in mid-January. So if you are doing a super observation towards the end of October for one of those employees, it's possible that you're going to do their second evaluation in a short amount of time to meet that mid-January due date. So you may want to make it longer and reassess, especially your newer employees' progress closer towards the third evaluation. So making this mandatory improvement plan less than 90 days but closer towards your third formal observation so that you can review progress. So when the mandatory improvement plan comes to an end, for instance, you did a 50-day plan or a 60-day plan, 2.5 months later it's time for you to do the next observation. You will need to do another super observation where you are assessing the performance and the improvement of that employee. So if when you do that, the employee is proficient in all the standards, and in each of the comment boxes you have indicated, in this super observation, the employee is at a proficient level, and they are proficient in every standard, then they have made adequate progress on their mandatory improvement goals, and you are able to close that mandatory improvement plan. They have successfully completed it. So you will actually sign off in the comments on the end-of-year PDP review. So you will be able to go in, you will need to make comments in the end-of-year PDP comments box that the employee on such and such date was reevaluated, they were at an all proficient level on all standards, they've met their mandatory improvement plan goals, and they have made adequate progress. And that will get documented in the end-of-year PDP. Now, it is possible that upon reassessment, you have an employee who is not proficient in all of the standards, but it's a first-year teacher, and they have made tons of improvement during the year, and it is late February at this point, and you know for a fact that they have the one proficient that is required for them to meet the CMS Performance Matrix standard for a first-year initially licensed teacher, and they've made adequate progress. They haven't reached proficient in all 5 standards, but they are making adequate progress to be recommended for renewal at the end of the year. In other words, you are satisfied that there are no severe performance issues with this employee. There is no risk of them being recommended for non-renewal. So in this case, they are not proficient in all standards, it is later in the year, and they are meeting the CMS Performance Matrix standard for their career status. You will go into the end-of-year review for the PDP, and in the comments box, you will indicate that they've made adequate progress to meet the CMS Performance Matrix standards. And then, similar to last year, you will access the resource folder and you will download the template for an exemption, and you will submit that exemption letter to me indicating that they are making the required progress for renewal for the CMS Performance Matrix. The third case is that the employee is not proficient in all the standards, and you have significant concerns about performance. In other words, the employee is not meeting CMS performance standards for their career status. So this could be a third-year teacher, for instance, who is still developing in 4 out of 5 of the standards, and we know that by the end of the 3rd year they should be proficient in all 5. We have significant concerns about that employee's performance. So this one is going to be different. You're going to need to go into the end-of-year review for PDP, and in the comments box you're going to indicate that the employee is not making adequate progress to meet CMS Performance Matrix standards. And then in addition, you will need to create a PCL that includes the PDP goals that you already had established that were not met. You may need to refine those goals so that the employee has additional resources or strategies to implement for the remainder of the year. Or if any new concerns have come up in the PCL, you would need to address those so that the employee has adequate time to try to improve before it is time for the recommendation for non-renewal. So with this mandatory improvement plan, I think it's important in the way that you frame this with your employees, because you are going to have very inexperienced teachers at the beginning of the year who are going to receive a super observation, and they're going to be rated on every single standard. We would not typically expect our 1st and 2nd year teachers on a September observation to be at a fully proficient level. So as you talk about this mandatory improvement plan, we need to make sure that they are understanding that we are not starting out trying to document them to non-renew them at the end of the year, or that we're trying to work them out of a job. When you start this initial mandatory improvement plan for these employees who are not at a proficient level, you need to really ask yourself, are there severe performance problems, or are they where they should be because they're just a brand new teacher and haven't had enough time to progress like they will over the course of the year? And you need to frame those conversations like that. So for instance, a career teacher who has been here for 10 years, that observation, there are 4 developings. That one is a real issue. And that mandatory improvement plan leads to the conversation of it is expected that you're at a proficient level, and that person should be prioritized to do the super observation as early in the school year as possible. The mandatory improvement plan needs to be very significant and comprehensive. You need to be having regular checkpoint meetings, providing feedback on improvement or lack of improvement, and thinking of that as making sure that you are trying to help the employee improve, but if they're not improving, that you do have the documentation. Whereas a first-year teacher who's brand new more than likely isn't proficient, but is doing a good job for their status. You're trying to frame those goals as this is what the school's going to help you do and this is what you need to do, so that by the end of the year you can make the progress needed so that your students are successful and you are recommended for your contract for the upcoming year. But I don't want with our new teachers who aren't all proficient in the beginning of the year, when we normally probably would not expect them to be, for this to turn into something that they fear. We want this to be the opportunity to create a plan so that they can improve and progress as we would want them to throughout the year. You will need to conduct a super evaluation for your assistant principal, and as you know, in My Talent you don't have that opportunity until the end of year, until the summative or the summary review. So you will use a fillable form that you will download either from our Google folder, or we will also have a link up on our talent management page. You will take the fillable form and you will rate the assistant principal on each of the elements and standards. In the comment box, indicate that it's a super observation and their level of performance at that time. We are setting a due date of November 18th for that, which would be when all of the abbreviated plan observations are due. If the administrator is proficient in all standards, you will just continue with the normal PDP and normal evaluation cycle for that assistant principal, including the mid-year PDP review and progress goals and your end-of-year summary. If you find that the administrator is not proficient on any of the standards, you will create a mandatory improvement plan within the professional development plan. So in the initial PDP, you will go back in and create improvement plan goals that address each of the standards for which the employee is below proficient. The timeline should be less than 90 days, just like with all of your other employees, and you should try to time it to coincide with when you are going to do the next assessment for the assistant principal. Again, keeping in mind where an assistant principal is in their career life, a first-year assistant principal may not be fully proficient on November 18th when you do this assessment. And you may not have any concerns about their performance. They just haven't matured as a leader yet. So how you talk about that mandatory improvement plan with them may be very different than how you would talk to a 6th-year assistant principal who has been developing in the same 2 standards for the last 3 years. That would be more of a performance concern. And the mandatory improvement plan should be a lot more stringent, and much more documentation should be managed in case you need to work towards a non-renewal or a dismissal at the end of the year. So again, at the end of the mandatory improvement plan, just like with all of our employees on a mandatory improvement plan, you will need to reevaluate their performance. We'll use the fillable form for the assistant principal, and you will upload that to the end of year PDP review. So all of the first fillable form will go on the mid-year PDP, and the reassessment will go on the end of the year PDP. And we're trying to keep the standards so that for record keeping and for monitoring, we can go in and we can make sure that they're in there. So at the end of the mandatory improvement plan, when you reevaluate performance, just like with the teachers and licensed support staff, if the employee or the assistant principal is proficient in all the standards, you will just indicate in the comment section of the end of year PDP review that they've made adequate progress to reach a proficient level. If they are not proficient in all the standards, but they're making adequate progress towards their goals and you have no concerns about their performance, you will indicate in the end of year PDP comment section that they are making adequate progress and improvement in all of their goals, and you'll send me the exemption letter that you can download from the resource folder. The third option is if they are not proficient in all of the standards and they are not making adequate progress. In other words, there are serious performance concerns with this individual. You will need to create a formal PCL, performance counseling letter, and you will need to begin the process. Hopefully you would have already with the mandatory improvement plan, but you would increase the level of documentation and accountability with the employee at that point. You will need to complete evaluations for licensed support staff who are not on a NESAS plan. And you'll know from previous years, our deans and our facilitators are a couple examples of these employees, and they are on a CMS plan where they only have one evaluation a year. They have a professional development plan that starts at the beginning of the year, can be reviewed at mid-year and reviewed again at the end of the year, but they only have one formal evaluation in their observation bucket in My Talent. So for these individuals, you will need to, just like everyone else, conduct an assessment, a super observation, where you take into consideration all of the relevant information available on that licensed support staff, including their prior year summative ratings, their PDP goals, and any student growth you can attribute to this individual. You will have a pre-conference. You will conduct a formal observation that you would do with a dean or a facilitator. Then you will download the fillable form that we will have in the Google Drive and on the talent management page. And you will, for each of the standards, provide an overall rating and indicate in the comments section that this is the super observation, indicate their performance at the time, any strengths and recommendations for growth. If that licensed support staff member is not proficient on any standard, you should already know this. It's going to be just like everybody else. You are going to create a mandatory improvement plan within the PDP. So you would go back to the initial PDP, you would add mandatory improvement plan goals to address any standards for which the employee is below proficient. Those goals should be specific. They should include strategies and supports to help them improve. The timeline for the mandatory improvement plan should be less than 90 days, and it should coincide with when you plan to reassess that individual. So at the end of the plan, you will need to conduct another super observation on a fillable form where you assess the employee's progress. If they are proficient in all of the standards at that point, on the final PDP comment box, you will indicate that they have made adequate progress and are performing at a proficient level in all standards. If they are not proficient but are meeting the CMS performance matrix standards, in other words, for their career year, they are making progress and you have no concerns about their performance and they're not being recommended for non-renewal, You would indicate in the end-of-year PDP section that they have made adequate progress and are meeting CMS performance standards. You would create an exemption letter to send to me. If they are not proficient in all standards, they are not making adequate progress, you have serious concerns about their performance, you'll need to formalize that into a performance counseling letter and indicate in the end-of-year PDP review that they have not made adequate progress. You saw, if you were part of this last year, you had a similar flow chart just to help you out. Some people like a very visual process, so you will, for our super observations for people on the standard or comprehensive plans, try to conduct those super observations by October 28th. If a mandatory improvement plan goal has to be created, you will put it in the initial PDP. For our abbreviated plan and our non-NESAS licensed support staff, including assistant principals, you will use a fillable form and you will complete that by November 18th. And you will upload those forms into the mid-year PDP review. You will need to, on all super observations, make it a formal observation with a pre-conference where you look at all relevant information on the employee. If they are below proficient in any standard on the super observation, you will need to create mandatory improvement plan goals for that employee on their initial PDP, which is different than last year because we were so far into the school year when we did the super observation. So you will have these resources available to you. You will have this policy just like we had it up for you last year. You will have the observation form that you will use for any teacher on an abbreviated plan. You will complete the observation in the first container, in the observation container in MyTalent, but you will also need to take this fillable form and complete it and then upload it into the PDP. You will have the evaluation form, the fillable form that you will use for licensed support staff that are not on the NESAS plans, in other words, deans, facilitators, and other support staff. That also will be uploaded into the mid-year PDP. You will have a list of positions on this drive of all the people who will be evaluated on the CMS license support evaluation form, just in case you're not sure. This PowerPoint presentation will be available. We will also put a link so that you can watch this recorded version again. And then we will also have the sample exemption letters where you will have to make small changes to it depending on the employee. Those would not be used until a reassessment or a second super observation, and those would all need to be sent to me to get the superintendent's approval. So, next steps for most of you, and I think a lot of you have probably already begun to do this first bullet after our meeting in August. You do need to work with your administrative team to devise a plan to begin working on your super observations of all of your licensed staff. So work with your administrative team, create a schedule, and make sure that you're conducting the super observations. One of the things I did not mention is that the development of the mandatory improvement plans needs to be done by a principal or an assistant principal. I understand that you'll be using other people in your building who have administrative degrees and who have had the evaluation training to help conduct observations. But those individuals should not be creating or monitoring a mandatory improvement plan. That should be done by the principal and assistant principals at the school. You will need to also talk with your employees, hopefully at your next staff meeting if you haven't already done this, to explain the state statute and the policy around required observations for licensed staff in our North Carolina designated low performing schools. Again, I encourage you to make this as positive of an experience as you can with your staff. We definitely want great teachers in our schools, and especially in your schools, and want them to feel as comfortable with this process as possible, that you're trying to create a supportive environment for them, and that their improvement goals are to help them improve, and for you to be able to provide feedback and supports that can help them in their development as a teacher. Of course, you may have some individuals who have been at your school for a year, 2 years, where you do know of serious performance concerns at the beginning, but for the most part, most of your teachers hopefully are on target, and you want them to think of this as a positive experience, not immediately stress them out over this. Just a review of the due dates. Standard and comprehensive plan employees should try to have super observations completed by October 28th. Anyone on the abbreviated teacher plan or the CMS licensed support staff plan due on November 18th, and assistant principals the super observation by November 18th. This is in line with the evaluation timeline that you are already given, and keep in mind that first and second year teachers should have their first 2 evaluations completed by the end of first semester. And finally, we want to make sure that when you're thinking about your schedule, you may want to think about your staff, and you know teachers who you've had in your building for several years. These possibly could be career status teachers or teachers in their 4th, 5th, or 6th year without career status who were not at a proficient level at the end of their summative evaluation last year. We would expect that all of our career employees and our teachers in their 4th, 5th, and 6th year are at a proficient level, because that's what was needed for renewal each year and to achieve their career status. So if you have employees like that who have been in your school for several years, and you already have the summative where you expressed concerns from the previous year, I would prioritize that super observation first and make sure that your mandatory improvement plan is very solid and comprehensive with specific goals and specific measurements, strategies, and meetings to assess progress. So I think we have a few questions. One of the questions is, are teachers on mandatory improvement plans required to have a super observation on all evaluations? So the answer is maybe. The first evaluation, if they're below proficient, they would be placed on a mandatory improvement plan. The second observation, if it coincides with when you are reassessing their performance because the mandatory improvement plan is coming to a close and they are at a fully proficient level at that point, you would be able to close out the mandatory improvement plan. You would indicate that they have made adequate progress to become proficient in all of the standards. Or if we're closing it out and it's one of our teachers in their 1st, 2nd, or 3rd year who are meeting MS performance matrix standards, and you feel sure that they're on track for renewal of their contract, no real performance concerns, you would write the exemption letter and close them out. Then you would do a normal 3rd evaluation. If, however, the 2nd evaluation is the reassessment of the mandatory improvement plan, they're still below proficient and they are having significant performance issues, that 3rd one would also be a super observation, because their mandatory improvement plan would still be continuing, and you would still be making a decision if they've made adequate progress to say that they have met their mandatory improvement plan goals and are being recommended for a contract for the next year. A second question, is it ever appropriate for a teacher outside of the new teacher window to bypass the mandatory improvement plan embedded in the PDP. So on the first super observation of the year, with as early as we are in the year, no, it would not be appropriate. Where it may be appropriate is on the reassessment, and we are closer to the end of the year and we have seen this employee progressing for 4 or 5 months and we know that they're on track for renewal of their license. At that point, you've already implemented a mandatory improvement plan, you've already seen significant improvement. It would be appropriate at that point to say that they are meeting expectations, the CMS performance matrix standards, and that they are on track for renewal of their contract. We want to make sure that sometimes we don't start to see very significant problems with an employee's performance until later in the year. Sometimes that's January or February. We want to make sure that we have had supports in place and goals in place throughout the year to support them in their development, so that if we're recognizing during those months that there are significant deficits or significant performance concerns, that we have addressed it and documented it along the way. Do I need to answer that? All right, if there are any more questions, please, we'll give a few minutes for you to type those in, and then we'll make sure that we have recorded the questions that have been asked to put out on an FAQ document for you. If you have any questions in the future about the evaluation requirements for the employees in your school, you can contact me or Rob Ellison. These are our email addresses and phone numbers. If there are any questions about My Talent or the fillable forms, feel free to reach out to Chris Zorgan, the Executive Director for Talent Management, or you can just email talentmanagement@cms.k12.nc.us. Chris's team is great at checking that throughout the day, multiple people checking that email address throughout the day and answering your questions, because we want to make sure you have all the support that you need in this process. So a question about how do we support teachers that ended the year on performance counseling letters. So if they were on a performance counseling letter at the end of the year and they still did not reach a proficient level in the standards that you had outlined in the performance counseling letter, and I would prioritize those super observations and do them first. I would do those first, and there could be a difference between a career employee and a non-career employee. A career employee who ended the year at a developing level on a performance counseling letter would need to be on a more severe or a more comprehensive plan. So with that, I don't want to give too much information. If you have an employee in that situation, a career employee who was on a performance counseling letter last year, ended the year below proficient, I would like for you to either call me or Rob Ellison for us to talk specifically about that person, because the difference in the level of documentation needed for the dismissal of a career teacher is very different than the level of documentation needed for non-renewal of a probationary teacher. So we want to make sure that we know exactly what type of employee we're talking about and can guide you in the right way. It's possible that if it's a career employee who has been documented for a while, that the mandatory improvement plan would go straight to a performance counseling letter. I think those are going to be more rare. And so we would want to work with you very specifically on those to make sure you have the right level of goals and support and documentation with those employees. All right, I think that's all of the questions, but again, we are here to support you. You have our contact information if you have any questions. I do appreciate you joining us today, and hope you have a great rest of your day.